Hello, 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 boys and girls. All right, we are going to start on a new chapter today. We are moving on to chapter 2. So in chapter 2, we deal a lot with percents. We're going to be finding percents of numbers and all sorts of things. Today we are starting with percent of numbers. And what we need to make sure that we remember and we know before we can move on to actually learning percents of numbers is we need to remember, how do I change a percent to a decimal? And so let's just do a quick review here. If I have, let's say, 40%, let's say I have 26%, let's say I have 5%, and last but not least, let's say I have 132%. I need to know, how do I change all of these to decimals? And so what we should know is that we can do it one of two ways. It depends on how comfortable we are with this. So 40% as a decimal should be 0.4 or 0.40. Putting the extra 0 there does not make or break anything. It's just, it needs to make sure that we're 0.40. One of the ways that you might have learned is you might have learned to move the decimal 2 spaces to the left when doing so, because a whole number like 40 has a decimal right there. And so by moving it 2 spots over, that's where the decimal lands. The other way that you would have learned is that a percent is out of 100. And so in order to change the percent to a decimal, we would have to divide by 100. Either way, that's how we get to to changing a percent to a decimal. So what would 26, 5, and 132% be? You should have come up with 0.26, 0.05, and 1.32. And again, you could have done this either one of two ways, because it is the same thing, moving the decimal 2 spots to the left or dividing by 100. During this unit, we will be using a calculator, so you will need that every day for this unit. All right, now that we've reviewed that, let's go ahead into finding percents of numbers. So when I'm finding the percent of a number, that's basically like saying find part of a number. Like, for instance, if I asked you to find 50% of $100, you would say it's $50. If I told you to find 50% of $80, you would say it's 40, because that's half, and 50% is half. When I'm finding parts of a number, I'm finding just part of it, or the percentage of it. Okay? So the book goes through 2 different ways to solving percents of numbers. The first way deals with writing the percent as a fraction and then multiplying. And the second way talks about writing the percent as a decimal and then multiplying. We're going to stick with the second way, but please note that they are the exact same thing. But since we are going to be using a calculator, writing the percent as a decimal makes our life a little bit easier. Alrighty, so you'll see in the first example, they wrote the percent and then they multiplied. They wrote the percent as a fraction and then multiplied. We're going to skip this way. We're going to go straight down to step 2, or example 2. And again, we're going to write our steps. Again, when we are finding percent of a number, see this? Find 25% of 180. When I'm given a problem that looks like this, find the percent of a number. We learned that the of word is like times when it's next to a fraction, or when it's next to a percent too. So finding percent of a number, we change the percent, change percent to a decimal. I want you to write this down. That's your step one. Step one. Step two, multiply. And that's it, boys and girls. Those are our 2 steps for today, and that's what we're going to stick with. So let's go ahead. Let's do an example together. Let's do letter A. 40% of 70. Well, 40% of 70, my first step would be to change 40% to 0.4. And my second step is to multiply times 70. Well, this is where I might get out my handy dandy calculator and I would type in 0.4 times 70. And I get 28. So my answer to letter A is 28. Let's try and do letter B, C, and D. Why don't you guys give those a shot? So again, step one, change your percent to a decimal and then multiply. So 15% as a decimal is 0.15. And then I multiply. And I would get 15. What did you guys get for C and D? All right, for C, you should have gotten 88. For D, you should have gotten 210. Great job. All right, let's turn the page. So what happens when we have a percent that's either over 100%? So when we have greater than 100%. Well, let's go ahead and try. We're still going to do it the exact same way. But here I have find 150% of 28. So they made 50% into a decimal, and then they multiply. They got a number that was bigger than 28. Does that seem normal? Yeah, that's totally normal because we have 100% plus 50 more percent. So if we have over 100%, it might be over the number. Let's try one. 150% of 20. Changing 150% to a decimal would be 1.5, or for some of you, you may still be writing 1.50, and that's fine. Times 20, and what do I get? You should say, Mrs. Schultz, you get 30. And that's my answer. Try letter F. What do you get? All right, you should have gotten 56. Questions? All right, let's go ahead. Let's try and do a couple more. This is one of the reasons why you might need to do this. You might need to find percents of numbers, and that deals with graphs. So sometimes graphs gives us percentages. Mostly, it's shocking that the book doesn't put us a pie graph, a circle graph, because usually the circle graphs are the ones with the percentages. And then they say, oh, well, this is 30% and this is 30%. This is, 20. These are different percentages. And they ask you how much each person or each little thing is worth. So that's usually when finding percents of numbers helps. It also really helps We use percents of numbers in our everyday life when we're talking about tips and taxes and things like that. That's usually where we deal with them. So knowing what we know now, I want to actually do 1 through 4 with you. So go ahead, give 1 through 4 on this guided practice a shot, and let's figure out what we got.